Okay, hello and welcome to the second presentation of the ANZCA webinars. This one is going to focus on pitfalls and solutions for candidates who prepare for ANZCA Drum Kit examinations. Your presenter is Mark Murphy, and Mark has been associated with ANZCA for quite a number of years as a student, a teacher, an examiner, and then as our syllabus author. So I'll leave you in Mark's capable hands. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Tony. All right, so we're going to get cracking, breaking down some of the areas that I've experienced as a student, teacher and examiner throughout my journeys, and try to give a few tips and share a few stories with you. I'm going to start with the syllabus. I do talk about it a lot because it's so important. If I was asked by someone, what's the most common imperfection that I experience as an examiner, I would say insufficient research on the syllabus would be at the top of my list. Now, that's not a criticism, I'm not criticising anyone, I'm just telling the truth. That's the most common flaw that I experience as an examiner. Now, what I've experienced with that type of imperfection, I'll call it, is that at times students will turn up with the incorrect amount of list pieces prepared for an exam, or the incorrect technical work prepared, not having the right amount of snare studies, etc. So they're really common things that I experience. And to be honest with you, occasionally I'll do an exam where a student doesn't even know that there's a general knowledge section or a sight reading section, just completely didn't pick up on it in the syllabus. What I do as a teacher personally is if I'm going to prepare a student, let's say for a grade 2 exam, I'll just sit down one morning, have a cup of coffee and a Vicky, spend about 4 minutes scanning the syllabus and go, yes, that's right, that's what I've got to do at grade 2 level. And I'm good to go, I'm ready to teach that student. So it really doesn't take a lot of time or stress or effort to study it, but checking the syllabus is quite important. What I've found as an examiner is the emotional damage that can do to a student if we as teachers don't have them prepared properly. So I've had cases where students are, just terribly distressed because they haven't got the right amount of list pieces, so they know they're going to get caned on the scoreboard or lose marks, and they're just devastated. It can almost turn a kid off music, and that's our job as teachers, to make sure that we've got them prepared, that we know how many pieces they need to prepare for an exam. So that's the most common problem I find. I'd like to now move on to chatting about some technical work realities. So all the requirements for the technical work are listed both in the syllabus and in the technical workbook, okay? So as teachers, all the information that we need to prepare our students is there if we look hard enough. The technical workbook has a notated version of absolutely every rudiment that is required for the syllabus and the system, and all the little requirements of counting and tempos and things, everything is written down both in the syllabus and particularly laid out very thoroughly for you in the technical workbook. Some of the qualities that an examiner will look for during the exam are as follows. Playing each rudiment correctly is at the top of the list. Playing by memory for the preliminary through to grade 5 levels is important. Counting aloud when relevant or required. Even dynamics between the right and left hands. Certainly not like a robot, but just not having one hand completely drown the other hand out. Even rhythms, for example, not rushing double taps and stumbling or rhythmic hesitations. Relevant tempos, or meeting the minimum required tempo if that's associated with the grade. Consistent timing, starting a rudiment and keeping the speed of that rudiment fairly even is a good thing. And sound techniques or grips. So they're the little things that examiners will be looking for when conducting the technical work section of an exam. All right, some of the common pitfalls that I've seen when examining technical work, I'm still on that same subject, is the student not being able to count aloud. Now, I would say this is probably top of the list on the technical work imperfections. A student might be able to play their first rudiment quite well, and then in the exam room I might say, okay, that was great, could you please do that again and count aloud? as you would prepare with your teacher. Sometimes that can just fall apart. They cannot count aloud and play the rudiment. So it is clearly stated in the syllabus to count aloud, and that's one that I find is a real problem that pops up quite regularly. Another thing that I find as well is a drop in quality with the non-dominant hand start. So I'm a right-handed person, so my non-dominant hand is my left hand. I find that a lot of students just don't practice the left-hand start, and then come exam day they can fall apart a bit. So that's another thing that I do experience as an examiner. Uneven rhythms can be a little bit of a rascal, particularly like with paradiddles and things that can rush their double taps, and these things happen, but they're the sort of things that I do experience as an examiner. Lower than the minimum required tempo is, I wouldn't say it's common, but it does happen where people don't prepare and sufficiently to the right tempo. Learning the rudiments by memory also is a problem that pops up from time to time. Some students can play their rudiments really well, but they just haven't drilled their memory of the rudiments sufficiently for an exam. So that's looking at it through an examiner's lens. Moving on to how I see that as a teacher, having experienced these issues when examining, I try my best to look for these problems when I'm preparing my own students. The counting aloud, as I said, is a really common problem. So what I do as a teacher is I just force my students to count those rudiments aloud when we're working on them in my teaching studio. I actually suspect some of them really dislike me quite a lot because I do that, but come exam day when they're ready and they're strong and they can pull them off without falling apart, the level of dislike reduces significantly, and then when they get their report, then they're all happy. So I just basically torture them all the time, make them count aloud, but I'm doing it at home. Doesn't matter, do it now in the lesson. That's the way I tackle it anyway. With the non-dominant start, as in pulling left-hand starts for a right-hand player, I just keep rotating the starts in my teaching studio. I try to not overlook that non-dominant start, keep pushing that. Not overcorrecting where their right hand becomes weak, just always rotating it around and keeping it alive. With the uneven rhythms and rush taps and things, I just really keep a real good focus on that when I'm working through the rudiments with my students. And if something pops up, just re-coaching them, re-teaching them how the rudiment should sound to get the rhythms nice and balanced and even. With the lack of memory problem that I experience as an examiner, the way I cope with that as a teacher is I just keep rotating the rudiments. Each week I'll ask one or two rudiments by memory, just keep pushing the memorising thing. Because it's not easy to remember them all, but if they want to get the top marks, they have to be able to remember them. Now, moving on to a little chat about list pieces. As you know, the options for the list pieces are all written here clearly in the syllabus in their categories, and the Drum Kit Fill series has several options for the list pieces that the students can choose from. There are many other options on the syllabus as well, not just the Drum Kit Performance series. Now, selecting a variety of styles or genres can definitely help develop versatility in our students and their growth. But if you follow the list A, B, C and D categories, that'll almost take care of itself anyway, but I still keep it in mind when preparing my students to try to create a variety of genres that they're capable of playing. Some of the qualities that an examiner will look for when examining the list piece performances, the top of the list is accuracy. An examiner likes to see the student play what's written on the page, because sometimes they don't, but that's what we like to see. The next worth mentioning is musicality, feel and groove. Now, as we all know as drummers and musicians, playing the notes accurately on the page is a really good achievement for a student. But adding some spirit and some soul and musicality and groove and feel, it's just so important for us musicians to be able to do that, because music, from my point of view, is more of an emotion than a science. So we need to help our students develop a respect and a love for musicality and groove. I think is so important, and an examiner is just delighted when they see that and hear that. They just love it. It can really help bring the marks up. Even timing is majorly important for us drummers. We all know that if we can't keep in time, we can't keep a job in a band. So in the exam room, the examiner will certainly make note of timing imperfections if students speed up or slow down. So that's super duper important. Selecting a wise tempo is important as well. Some pieces sit better at different tempos, and we all know that, but we have to make our students aware of that. From grade 4 onwards, every piece in the Drum Kit Performance Series has a metronome mark. Prior to that, there's only one piece, I think it's Solo 8 from grade 3 that has a metronome mark. The rest of them, it's up to the student to pick a tempo that they're comfortable with, because they're beginners, they're just getting started, so we're not going to put that pressure on them. But choosing a wise tempo is important. What I do with my students on that subject is I try to coach them that when they're in the exam room and the examiner's writing down about their technical work, I say, open your book to list A and have it ready straight away. And while the examiner's writing, just play the first 2 bars in your mind to just get your tempo set so you can imagine them and hear them in your mind. So then when the examiner says, yep, let's get started, you're already in that tempo. You've got your little human metronome ticking already. Examiners are also hoping for, a limited amount of errors. Now, when I say that, we're all human and we all make mistakes. I can assure you that I do. But the less mistakes that they make in an exam, clearly the higher the result will be. It's a little side comment to that, though, that I'd like to share with you. From an examiner's point of view, the amount of deductions for errors can vary depending on whether the musicality strengthens up the piece as well, and also how the student copes with an error. So in the real world, when we're doing a gig, we don't stop when we make a mistake. We bluff to the best of our ability and keep playing and keep smiling and just keep the show going, don't we? So in an exam, I try to coach my students that if you're in the middle of an error and you know you're in trouble, do your best to keep bluffing, just keep going and just keep steady. And if anything, the examiner will probably admire you because they can sense you've made stuff up, and that's cool, you're human, we all make mistakes. But if you have the ability to recover and weave your way out of it, the examiner will actually get a smile and think, wow, this is a real musician. They were gone, they were in trouble, but they managed to pull their way out of it. Because that's what we do in the real world. When we're doing gigs, we keep going. So with your students, if they're able to just bluff and keep going, they will probably be penalised less harshly than if they completely stop and have to go back 4 bars to drop in somewhere and restart again. If they're completely gone and there's just no salvaging it, well, they have to stop and just restart. That's so be it, just do so and get back on the bike as quickly as possible. Another little problem that I've experienced in my examining journey is synchronicity between limbs. Now, it's normally present in the lower grades, sometimes up to about grade 3 sometimes. A lot of the snare drum pieces have got feet ostinatos below them, bass drum notes and hi-hat notes. And I would say commonly, actually, I commonly come across a lack of synchronicity where the 2 notes don't land at the same moment and there's a bit of flamming between the snare and the kick. Also, at the lower grades, I experience a lack of synchronicity between the bass drum and the hi-hats. So when you're playing the hi-hat, we want the bass drum to land at the same moment. You know all about that. But a lot of students don't seem to prepare very well on that one, and they get a bit of flamming between their hi-hats and bass drum. So these are some of the common things that I have experienced as an examiner when dealing with list pieces, and there's a few tactics that I implement in my teaching to combat those things. Now, with sight reading, the requirements are thoroughly listed in the syllabus and in this sight reading and oral testing book here. In the exam, examiners will be looking for an accurate performance of the notes. Example, the correct drum being played, if it's meant to be tom 1, we want it on tom 1, not the snare, and correct note values, all that stuff that would make sense to you teachers. A fast tempo is not expected. Remember, this is sight reading. It's not demanded or expected that they play at 1,000,000 miles an hour. A wise tempo is welcomed, but if they're too slow, it can display a lack of confidence or preparation in the area. And if they're too fast, it can sometimes invite error, you know, when they take off at a blistering pace. Sometimes you're just cringing, thinking, oh, I think they're going to blow it because it's just a bit too fast. So getting a wise tempo is really important. Now, a high level of groove and musicality is definitely welcomed in this section, but it is not demanded. Remember, this is sight reading. Getting accuracy first is the main thing, and then if they can play with a little bit of musicality on top of that, then that's just a magnificent bonus. But accuracy is definitely the number one priority in sight reading. I'd like to explain or share with you a little routine that I use with my students when preparing them for their sight reading. So the routine goes as follows. I'll put a sight reading example on the music stand in front of my student, and I'll coach them on the routine and go through it with them until in the end they can implement that routine automatically when it's game day. So the first thing that I say to my students is, check out your time signature, 2, 4, 3, 4, 4, 4. That's the most important thing. Then what I ask them to do is to do a vibe check, just a really quick scan. Is this a snare drum piece? Is it beats? Is it beats and fills? So for example, if it's a snare drum piece, you can release your mind of all that worry and concentration of reading up and down the staff. You're now just reading across the staff, so that can save a bit of time and stress, of course. The next thing that I ask them to do is to figure out how am I going to count this piece in my mind. If it's 2, 4, we know that the foundation is going to be 1, 2, 1, 2, or 1 and 2 and whatever comes up, but that's the foundation, because they don't want to be guessing their counting or think halfway through, oh geez, I probably should count. They need to get in their routine. Time signature, quick vibe check, how am I going to count the piece? The next thing is I ask them to start a visual check and actually start reading what's going on and squeeze as much of that as possible before the examiner asks them to commence. So you're actually, in a sense, you're playing the piece in your mind. You're not allowed to actually practice it on the kit, but you're practicing it in here, you're playing it as you're checking. The next thing is to just, if you've got time, to look out for any accents or dynamic marks or other articulations that might be there. Choosing a wise tempo with sight reading is really, really important. For example, the first bar might be just some crotchets and quavers, or quarter notes and eighth notes if you prefer. And at bar 5, there could be a heap of 30-second notes. So if the student starts at a tempo that's appropriate to bar 1, when they get to bar 5, they might fall apart. So I like to preach to my students to set your tempo to enable you to play the busiest and most complex part comfortably. So it might mean that bar 1 actually sounds a bit embarrassing, but when it gets to bar 5, the examiner and the student will both know, yeah, that's a wise tempo because I can't squeeze those 30 seconds in any faster. So I go through that routine with my students and I try to drill it so on game day they just go bang and they just go through that routine. So that's worked really well for me as a teacher over the big journey. Now we're going to move on to some oral testing. Now the requirements again are listed in the syllabus and in the sight reading and oral testing book. There are many, many samples and examples in this book that teachers and students can use. I'd like to also mention that the examples in the sight reading and oral testing book are incredibly similar to what will happen in the exam. It's not designed to trick the students. If they do the work, they will do well in the exam, barring nerves, of course. So the examiner will have a manual that is not this book that will get used in the exam, and it is different. Will there be no integrity in the exam? But it is similar. So if you drill them and train them from that book, they will be prepared properly, I can assure you. So the oral tests play an important role in the development of a musician, in my opinion. We obviously need to develop an ear for music. I think it's as important to play by ear as it is to be able to read. It depends on the situation. So I think to be a complete musician, if you can read music when it's necessary, you're comfortable with it, and when you just got to play on the spot, you're comfortable doing that as well. Because I've found in my journey, I've needed both avenues to get through. So I think it's important. What I wanted to do was just present a little low-grade oral test for you. I'll do a bit of playing and show you what will happen in the exam. And then I'll switch to a higher grade one just to give you a bit of a cross section of what we'll be up against. Okay, so I'm going to have a little look at a grade one oral test. Just one moment, please. Here we go. Okay, so there are 4 sections to the oral test. The first section, question 1, the examiner will tap or clap a rhythm and the student will identify the time signature. So the options at grade 1 level will be 4/4 time or 3/4 time. So here's an example of what the examiner will do. And the examiner would play that a second time, and hopefully the student would say that that's in 3/4 time. If they picked up on the accents, they were clearly there. I'll show you again. So if they listen to those accents, they will help them through. Question 2 is where the examiner will play a 4-bar pattern and the student will try to copy that pattern or imitate it and tap it back. So here's an example for you. The examiner would play this. The examiner would play it a second time for the student, and then hopefully the student would clap that rhythm back identical. Question 3, the examiner will play a basic rock beat or a syncopated rock beat or a shuffle beat, and the student will be able to identify that. In the exam, they'll only get 2 questions, not all 3, but they won't know which ones they'll get. So this would be an example. The examiner would play this. And hopefully the student would say that that's a basic rock beat. Then the examiner might play this. Hopefully the student would say that it's a shuffle beat. And the 4th and final question at grade 1 level, the examiner will play a little pattern of rhythms and the student will identify how many bars were played. So for example, the examiner might play this. Identify 5 bars. I hope I did 5 bars, I think I did. So that's a grade 1 sample of the oral testing. I'm going to move now to grade 6. And I mean, it's a very gradual step up through the system, but I just thought I'd just show you a bit of a cross section. So there are 4 questions again. Oral question 1 at grade 6 level. The examiner will play a 4-bar pattern, and then the student will try to imitate that or copy it and play it back. So the examiner would do something like this. So oral question 1, grade 6. And the examiner would play it a second time, jump off the kit, the student gets on and hopefully plays that as close as they possibly can. Remembering that that particular exercise would be worth 2 marks, so there are 4 bars in there. So I say to my students when I'm coaching them, even if you can only scam 2 out of the 4 bars, do it. Don't fold, have a crack, because you still might get 1 out of 2. If you get 2 out of 4 bars, mathematically the examiner should give you 1 mark out of 2. If you can scam 3 bars and you just knew you couldn't get the 4th bar, play all 3 bars and just bluff in the 4th bar and you might just get 1.5 out of 2. Every little mark can help when you're getting your score at the end of the exam. Now, oral question 2, the examiner will play either a 6/8 beat, a 7/8 beat, or a 5/4 beat, and the student will identify and name the time signature. In the exam, they'll only get 1 test, not all 3. So the examiner might play this, for example. The student would identify that as 7/8 time. Now, oral question 3 is the improvisation section. The examiner will play a 4-bar pattern twice, of course, and then the student will jump on the kit and do a 16-bar improvisation based off that theme. So, this bit, I reckon is really, really important because so many times in my career I just get a guitar riff thrown at me and I just got to play it and just improvise and embellish and build off that theme. So some of the students tend to get a little bit stuck on counting the 16 bars I've found in my journey, which is really bizarre when we think of it as teachers, because we all know that music regularly falls in 4-bar patterns or phrases. So I try to teach my students just think of 4 groups of 4. Don't think of 16. Just do your 4-bar pattern, then a second 4-bar pattern, then a third one, then a fourth one. Another cool trick they can use is to do the first half of their 16 bars on the hats. Do a fill, get onto the ride cymbal. It gives you like a reference point where you know where you are in the 16 bars. And some of the little things that I encourage my students to do, and I hope to see when I'm examining, is that they definitely capture a similar tempo and that they definitely capture the mood or the theme. So for example, in this example that I'm going to play in a moment, the theme is boom, da, da, boom, ba, boom, da. If that's alive somewhere in the piece, you can just throw in little passing notes, a little open hi-hat, a crash cymbal, little variation, little fills, bigger fills, you know, to build a crescendo at the end. But as long as the theme's going, I almost hum the tune in my mind when I'm playing, and I just fiddle around and add little layers to it. So you keep the same tempo or similar tempo. Certainly keep the theme present in some form, particularly the first bar or two. Just prove to the examiner that you did listen, and then start to take it out and just have fun. So if students can release themselves from the scientific aspect, this is actually really easy and a lot of fun because they're just jamming basically. Here we go. So the examiner will play this 4-bar pattern. Something like that, then they'll repeat it. The student gets on and goes, beautiful, this is going to be fun. And just have some fun, just go for it, but make sure you can count 4 times 4 or you're in trouble. Moving on to oral question 4, the examiner will play either a linear beat, a blast beat, a reggae beat, or a mambo beat. In the exam they will cop 2 questions, not all 4, but they don't know which 2 will be coming their way. So the examiner might play this, for example. So there's some samples of the oral tests and just a few little tips on what has helped me as a teacher over the journey. Now, one more thing I wanted to add to that as well is during my lessons, just repetition is the secret that has worked for me personally. I just do one oral test each week. I don't do the whole lot. I'll just throw one at them and just keep rotating it, keeping it alive. And I find by the time the exam comes around, they're normally pretty well prepared for that section. With general knowledge, the requirements again are listed in the syllabus and this general knowledge book here. This is a pretty handy companion in my studio when I'm teaching. The lower grades are mainly focused on fact-based questions. This is all verbal, of course, in the exam. Very simple things. What's that? It's a bar line. What's that? It's a half note. What's its value? 2 beats. Straightforward fact-based questions and answers. As the grades go higher, it is more open for discussion, not just plain simple facts. So a meaningful discussion is expected at the higher levels. A clear display that the student has made an effort is the key. That's top of the list, that they really have tried their guts out to get that section right. With this section, the general knowledge section, all of the notes, signs, terms and symbols from the pieces performed can be targeted by the examiner. So if it's on the page, on the chart that the student's performing, they need to know every item that's on that page. They won't be asked questions from other pages within the book. It will only be the pieces that they are presenting for the performance, okay? Plus, each grade has a specific list of questions or points in addition to what I've just mentioned. For example, a grade 2 exam, they need to know all the previously mentioned, plus all the requirements from the previous grades, and they need to be able to explain the definition of an accent, a tie, and rudimental notation. So each grade, there's the previous grade's information, the list pieces, plus a specific list of points for each level. Now, the way that I combat this section as a teacher, again, is repetition. If I teach a student 2 lines from the list A piece, I'll actually then attack that and say, oh, okay, the examiner could ask, what's that? They could ask for a definition of that. I just keep drilling it gently, week by week, until eventually it's all locked in. Now, I'd like to just share a little bit of information about the backing tracks that I've experienced in my journeys as an examiner, particularly. As mentioned in the previous session today, during the exam, the student must play along to the click track version of the backing track with the audio file. The demo version is just released as a courtesy for teachers and students. Some tips to share based on the issues I've experienced during my exams include mainly playback problems. For example, the audio set up in the studio must allow for the examiner and the student to hear the backing track. The student can certainly wear headphones, provided the examiner can still hear the backing track and the kit, because we as an examiner need to hear the relationship of the students playing and the backing track, okay? It's wise to be, I'm not telling people how to do this, but it's just my opinion, it's wise to be really well prepared for this area so that the student doesn't come under unnecessary stress during the exam. I would strongly recommend doing a full sound check and checking that all the equipment is working perfectly for the exam so that the student can hear the click track and hear the backing track, etc. There was one question that came through that I'd like to mention to you. If you were present in the first session today, I mentioned that there is a drum kit performance only option in the syllabus, and a question came through regarding that, where you find the information. It's in the final 2 pages of the syllabus, guys, on page 57 and 58. So whoever brought that question forward, it's in the very back of the syllabus, the information relevant specifically to the performance syllabus. Now, what I'm going to do is play a few tunes for you. I played some in the first webinar today, but some people might be watching this and didn't see the first webinar. And as a courtesy to those who did see the first webinar, I won't be repeating any of those solos. I'll play some different ones. Okay, just give me a moment, please, and I'll get cracking. Here we go. So, I'm going to rip straight to the preliminary level because we're almost running out of time. I'd like to squeeze a few solos in for you. So this is a preliminary solo, and it's solo number 6, a little 12/8 piece. I've got the wrong book, that won't help. Apologies. This is a preliminary solo, solo 6 in 12/8 time. Here we go. See, it's fairly basic at preliminary level, but realistic too, we play 12/8 grooves all the time. I'm going to move on to a grade 1 piece now, and I've selected a snare piece for grade 1 just to show teachers how basic grade 1 stuff can be, but still certainly a step up from the introductory and the preliminary. Okay, this is solo 10 from the grade 1 book. Terrifying for me because I've just been talking about synchronicity between bass and snare, and I haven't played this kit before, so I was terrified, but we got through, so that's all good. I would have really done a bad thing then, Tony, if I had got it wrong. Alright, so we're going to move on to the grade 2 book now. I'm going to play a grade 2 jazz solo just to keep trying to present a bit of variety for you. It's grade 2 solo 12. Moving on to grade 3, I'm going to play solo 14, which is a little Latin piece just to keep presenting some variety for you. So solo 14, grade 3 level. Solo 14. Now, just going to jump up to grade 5 because we're almost out of time. And so I'll close off with solo 14 from the grade 5 book, which is a kind of a funky little shuffly kind of piece. Okay, here we go. Grade 5 shuffle piece, solo 14. So that concludes our second session today. I just want to thank you all very much for your time and interest in what we're doing here with the ANZCA Drum Kit Syllabus. And if there are any questions that pop into your mind as an afterthought, you're very welcome to send them through as an email, and we'll try to address any questions that you may think of. So I'll hand you over to Tony just to wrap things up, and quite genuinely thank you again for your attendance and interest today. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for a really informative workshop. That's a good idea. So if there's any follow-up questions, send them through to admin@anzca.com.au and we'll send them off to Mark to answer any concerns you might have. So thanks again, Mark. I know Mark has to fly. He's got a full afternoon and a full evening of teaching.
I do, yeah.
Thanks, Mark. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.